Okay, we're going to call the meeting of the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee to order. Councilmember Zine and myself, Paul Koretz, are both present. And I'm going to ask that we pass item number 2 on consent as a note and file because the item's wholly incorporated into item number 1, and also ask that we receive and file number 5 under consent. Mr. Zine, are any problems with that? Okay, so those items are passed without objection. I'm going to ask that we get the one small item done first, item number 4.
Okay, on item 4, the Department of Animal Services has submitted a report, and it has to do with the acceptance of a bequest for $53,876.10. This will be from the estates of Walter Schussler and David Cunard.
If we could just ask the department to explain the donation.
Good afternoon, council members. John Chavez with the Department of Animal Services. In November 2012, we were pleasantly surprised by receiving a check and some correspondence from the estate of Walter Schuster and David Cunard. They are bequeathing nearly $54,000 to the department. In order for us to accept the check and approve the deposit into the Animal Welfare Trust Fund, we need council approval for that. So that is before you.
Members, any questions or comments on it?
The East Valley Shelter is going to receive this?
That's correct, Councilman. And what I should note is because there is a specific use for this particular funding, we will actually create a sub-account labeling it something like Schuster Cunard estate request for East Valley, so that only East Valley will benefit from that particular donation.
Does it have specific guidelines what they want the money for?
No.
Just that it goes to that shelter?
Yes. It was very, very vague. The one pager that we got from the executor and the check itself, very vague. It just says East Valley Animal Shelter. That's it.
And do we send an acknowledgement of appreciation to those that were involved in this gift?
We do. We actually have a very specific laundry list of things that we do when we receive a request like this, because it's all very legal, as you can imagine. One of those to-do items is to send a thank you letter to the estate. We also will bring this to council and request that the Schuster Cunard estate be publicly recognized for their donation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other comments or questions, we will move this item forward to accept the gift and approve it. So hearing none, that is approved.
Thank you.
And now we'll move to item number 1.
For item 1, the Department of Animal Services has submitted a report, and this has to do with the creation of an administrative citation enforcement program.
And if we could ask the department to report on this issue.
Good afternoon. John Forlin with the Department of Animal Services.
Oh, and by the way, I should note for the record that Mr. Alarcon has joined us and joined us on the vote on the previous item.
Which ones?
Which was item number 4. And also, we had item number 2 and 5, and if you'd like to join us on those consent items as well.
Okay, let me look at them and I'll mention. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Department of Animal Services is interested in moving forward with an administrative citation program. We began doing research last summer and found that what we would like to do is similar to what's being done in many jurisdictions. And it would allow us, I think for the first time ever, really speaking, to provide some enforcement power behind all of our municipal code regulations. We don't really have an administrative citation program now. When developing this package, we started out with our field officers to understand the frustrations they're dealing with. All they have now are civil citations, which don't really link back to the department. The judge can dismiss a case without the infraction ever being cleared up, as long as the person being taken to court can abide by the directions of the judge. So it's a very frustrating process. I think it's understood in the community that it's an enforcement optional kind of situation without the tools to make it really enforceable. So we've been looking at it for a long time at something like the administrative citations to provide the tools we need in the field. Our goal is compliance. We started with research last summer. I myself led that and conducted or contacted over 24 different communities, found that there are probably 100 different local jurisdictions in the state that have administrative citation programs. Many include, as a blanket, all of their animal services regulations in that. Part of our proposal also seeks to develop a request for proposal for an outside group to provide administrative support for the hearings. And we found over 50 different jurisdictions in the state of California doing that. If we look at it from within the city, administrative citations is something we've talked about but haven't really done a lot with. If you look at the state as a whole, administrative citation programs have been very active for over a couple of decades. The state law is all in place. Many of the jurisdictions have been to court to establish the legality of what's being done and how it's being done. We have many successes. We learned a lot about the startup process. One of the things we found is a very standard citation fee of $100, and that's part of our proposal. So we're here today I can answer any questions you may have, looking for your approval to move forward with the administrative citation program that we're proposing. We had talked about being a part of the citywide pilot, but as it's kind of on hold at the present, we're ready to go forward with a program specific to our department.
And I notice the general managers in the audience. Ms. Barnett, do you have anything to add, or was that covered?
Brenda Barnett, General Manager. Actually, I sent John up here because he did all the legwork, and I felt that he could answer your questions, and I'm happy to sit here with him for any questions that you might have, but we very much would like to be able to do this to bring some income in.
Well, I thank you both and the department for your very thorough work on the issue. Any questions, colleagues?
I got a couple. You mentioned $100, but in the notes here it says penalty ranging from $250 to $1,000. But your testimony was $100.
Yes, that's one of the changes that we're proposing. The discussion in the past has been a standard of $250, $500, and $1,000. As we did the research and looked at all the other communities, we found that the $100 level was used by probably 90% of those that we contacted.
And when we originally put the $250, $500, and $1,000, that was at the recommendation of the CAO's office, because that's when we thought it was going to go through citywide, and we thought those would be standard fees for the city. This is just for the department.
So when a person receives the citation and they want to contest that, who would hold that hearing? How would there be a hearing process?
They would be under due process. They would be entitled to a hearing, and we would, in our plan, we would hold those hearings. We would have a process to allow them to.
I'm looking at the cost because you're looking at an RFP contract with a revenue collection agency for processing the citations. Are you then going to hire additional people to have administrative hearings and then the revenue collection, and it turns out like the photo red light where we're paying more and getting none? Because when we talk about a process, if we're talking the current process, they receive a citation, go to court, and whatever happens, happens, and then the state gets money, and the county gets money, we get a few pennies.
Yeah.
And I don't have any problem with the administrative process, but if you're going to have to establish then the hearing officers with the administrative process, and then another process for the collection, in other words, are we going to be paying more for a program and getting fewer dollars in return? Because a $100 fine is not going to pay for administrative process and the collection process. Are we going to go into a deficit, which is what the problem was with the photo red light, which we scrapped, and now San Diego scrapped? I mean, is this going to be a cost-neutral program, or is this going to end up costing us money when we want to do enforcement? I have no problem with administrative enforcement, but there's got to be innocent to proven guilty, so there's got to be an administrative process, and then there's also got to be that collection process. If they're not going to go through the courts, we collect the revenue, we keep the revenue. But what mechanism and what's it going to cost us to establish that process to make this situation work?
I think those are really excellent questions.
Thank you very much.
We do have, we have had 2 hearing officers. We've returned one of the hearing officers to a shelter because we got caught up on our regular cases. So we do have people who are trained in the department to do the hearings. And
Already in-house.
Already in-house. As far as the collection, I believe that the city has regular collectors that they work with.
So we tag on, so we're not going to establish something new, we're just going to tag on what we already have.
Exactly.
All right, okay, good. Thank you.
Mr. Alarcon?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I wasn't sure we got a clear answer on Mr. Zine's question. Does the $100 cover the cost of the program? What is the cost of the program?
Well, the cost would be staff time, and we would not be adding any staff to do it.
Okay, so is this something we already do?
Well, we already do hearings for certain offenses, such as barking dogs, dangerous dogs. So this would be, in addition to that.
We already have field staff issuing civil citations.
Civil citations, but they're just not being collected.
Right.
So do we issue them? Or why issue them if they're not going to be collected?
We issue them, and then they go to the county for the court process, and then the money goes into the county instead of back to the general fund for the city.
Okay, so you said that if we issue the citation and the court doesn't act on it, then this would give us a second option to proceed.
This
So
would in fact
in
be preferable to
I'm
civil
just asking, but you said there's a second action that we take beyond what we're doing now.
Yes.
So that would seem to add more work.
It would replace the citation going to the county court. It would come then directly.
Oh, so you're not going to send it to the county?
Correct.
Okay.
If it's a strong case or involves some criminal conduct, there definitely would be work to get it to the court system.
Okay.
But almost all are not going to be at that level.
And then, but we're not doing any collections on this.
Currently, we are not.
But if you do this civil process, there's going to be a collection process.
Correct.
So that's additional work. I'm not seeing how you can create this new mechanism without creating more work.
Well, the city has people who already do collections, and I believe they have added to their numbers of groups who do collections.
The city?
Yes.
Yes.
You're the city. We're the city. Who in the city does that?
Office of Finance.
Office of Finance. So, okay. I'm still not clear on how we're going to add this additional program. There's got to be some additional work that you're going to be doing in order to bring this to fruition.
The work, I think, would be within the department of handling the paperwork to schedule the hearings. And that's what I'm saying. At this point, we've had 2 hearing officers.
Okay.
We've returned
So you're just saying you're going to absorb that
Yes.
work
Without
with
additional staff, yes,
budget.
sir.
Now you said that, Brent, I really have to correct you on something. You said the purpose of this is to raise more revenue for the city. That, I believe, it would be defined as a tax. The purpose of this program is to gain compliance,
Correct.
not
I
to
stand correct.
generate revenue. So I want to make sure that the record reflects that the purpose of this program is not to generate revenue, but to ensure compliance. Okay?
And I might be able to clarify it a little bit if we also bring up the Inspector General and get his input on how he thinks we should do this.
I got one more question before we get to, no, it's okay. LAPD, I received an email from one of my constituents. They were cited by LAPD officers on leash dogs, and they were complaining, why is LAPD doing enforcement? Well, LAPD can enforce basically any law that they want to enforce. Would this mold in, or would there be some cross-reference with the LAPD as far as enforcement, whether they send them to court or send them to the administrative process, some link in with LAPD?
I myself have not had that discussion, but it would be preferable if they would send them to us in appropriate cases, send them to us for administrative citations.
Because I think there should be, if this is approved, then I think there should be some coordination between your department and Los Angeles Police Department, because they do receive complaints. And if an officer, a bicycle detail, or a senior lead officer, they're getting complaints from the neighborhood, they go out and do enforcement, we should have some kind of corresponding process, so they're not in one area and you're in another area, and they're not going to call animal services. They see it, they observe it, they want to write the citation. It should be, if this is, and I think it would be approved, some cross-reference, so LAPD is on board, so we don't have two different angles going different directions. We kind of put it together for everyone's benefit.
Terrific. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Fernando Campos, Inspector General with the Office of the City Administrative Officer. Pleasure to be in front of your committee today to discuss the Administrative Citation Enforcement Program. I think before you have to make there's a fundamental question. Do we want to allow one single department, Animal Services in this case, to move forward with an administrative citation program in which they issue citations at approximately $1,500 a year, code compliance, possibly $25,000 to $125,000 in additional revenue for compliance purposes? Or do we want to move forward with a citywide administrative citation enforcement program, leveraging the entire city and other potential fines and permits and other citations throughout the city could bring economies of scale and also gain more efficiencies. For example, allowing one department to roll out an administrative citation enforcement program in the case of animal services, the cost may not be neutral at this point. I don't see any evidence right now with the reports that I've reviewed in terms of how do we keep that program at the cost neutral point with one single department. However, expanding it to the entire city as a citywide administrative enforcement program, you could have economies of scale, you could have efficiencies. The purpose of the administrative citation program is really to get people out of the court system. And so there are supposed to be some efficiencies by doing compliance. It's considered pre-delinquency, so before an account becomes delinquent, this is the remedy that you can go through, offering due process and administrative hearings so that individuals will comply with the current codes out there. So the idea is not to increase revenues by taxation or collecting revenues through taxes, but it's really about collecting based on a non-compliance. So it's really bringing folks to a non-delinquent status to a regular status.
Do you have this proposal coming, or?
I am actually looking.
This department should be commended for bringing it forward. Where's the CAO's recommendation in that regard?
Right, and one of the things that I would recommend is to have the CAO's office. The CAO's office did release a report back in March 2011 indicating some of the benefits of the ACE program, but also it requested several departments to come back with some recommendations and also a status update on how we would roll out that administrative citation program citywide. For example, the Controller's Office was asked to review the establishment of the code compliance trust fund. However, that has not yet happened. In addition to that, the city attorneys was asked to come back with what is the use of technologies that are out there, how much is the cost to roll this program, where would the hearing officer location sites be held at, who would be holding the administration hearing, would it be a pro tem judge or would it be an internal staff? So those questions need to be answered first before we move forward on a citywide basis. I do commend the Animal Services for bringing this item up for discussion. I think it's great public discourse. However, you have to look at what the cost it would be to implement this program in one single department. You're looking at 1,500 citations. Out of those citations, a portion of them could be considered delinquent or non-compliant. Your return on that investment based on the staffing and the resources that you're going to input in one department may not be the most cost-effective way to move forward. However, if you look at it on a citywide basis, that's where you can gain the efficiencies.
And we've been working on this, my office and others have been working on this for several years now. And I think we're actually close to getting this heard again in budget and finance. And I know there have been some different departments that have been working on it. I understand the frustration of Animal Services because I think they've been ready to roll this out for quite some time. But my sense is that it wouldn't be cost effective just to do it as Animal Services. The other department that we were looking at having moved forward on a pilot basis was LAPD. So I think if we were able to ask for the city attorney to come back with a draft ordinance that had animal services and LAPD as the two departments that this applied to, that would be much more cost effective.
And that is more consistent with the CLA's report. I believe their recommendation is to scale back the pilot program instead of having 9 departments coming back with 3 departments, police, housing, and animal services as the 3 departments to let or to release the pilot program, take a look at how it's going to perform over the next 6 months to a year, and then have the city attorney come back and respond and report on the effectiveness of that program at that time. So that is more consistent with the CLA's report as well.
So what I'd suggest at least is that we direct the city attorney to prepare a draft ordinance to change city codes so that animal services can be part of the citywide ACE program, and that we refer this item at that point per the request of Inspector General and others to the Budget and Finance Committee to be considered in conjunction with the other departments. And also, actually, I'll let you do your follow-up question in a moment, but we just had one speaker from the public, so I should give Phyllis Dougherty her opportunity before we get further on this.
Phyllis Dougherty with Animal Issues Movement. I've been working on this for 20 years. Every place in the country is doing this for animal services. The 3 departments that combine to enforce animal laws, because they are the ones that are most direct, are Animal Services, Code Enforcement, and the Police Department. In general, those are the 3 departments that handle this, because your code enforcement officers actually are in and see more than anybody. They see it inside the property. So Santa Monica and most of the cities do that, or the counties do that. Those are the 3 departments that work together, even creating task force for that purpose. The purpose of this is, Mr. Forland, I think, is a little confused. We've been doing it criminally, and it doesn't work because it gets too involved in the courts. So
Right.
most of the, now you take out certain municipal code sections and you can do this. You still have to do your state laws, of course, through the courts if you have a serious felony situation. The idea is that on the $100 ticket is that on the first time out, your officer is going out already on taxpayers' money. If he sees something that they were not willing to correct, or it looks like they're not going to be cooperative in correcting, then he can issue that $100 citation, which usually people pay. If you do a survey, you'll find out that 90% or 99% of people pay that first ticket. It's not a problem. However, the problem is if they have to go back out a number of times. If they have to go back out because of noncompliance a second and third time, then it goes up to $250 and $500, because you're getting serious about this and you are now having to pay for extra service for that officer to repeat that call. So you're no longer doing that under what would be his standard duties. Does that make sense? So that's why it goes up at that time. Then you have to recover the entire cost of that extra call out there. So that's why it was set up. And then by the $500, of course, if you have a negligence or an abuse situation, that is getting to the point of a misdemeanor, and you need to think of it in that way. All of the cities and counties are doing this with no problem. So this should have been done. This was ready 5 years ago. Where you are right now, this was all together when Linda Barth was here. This already went to the council. This was just waiting for wording from the city attorney. So we are repeating this wheel over now for about the 5th time. And this is a very, very good program. Everybody has this. The county. I just did an article on some little place with 2,000 people, like Farmdale, Missouri, something that has some excellent laws. And they've
I
been
have to
doing
ask
it
you
for
to wrap
years.
up.
Yeah, they've been doing it for years. It's very effective, and they have completely done away with their stray dog problem. So why can't we?
Thank you. Mr. Zine, you had a question?
The parking citations administrative process, have we checked to see how effective that is with the parking enforcement?
Had a number of extensive communications with the Department of Transportation on how their system runs, reviewed their RFPs and their system.
Is their system working?
That's for them to answer better than me. I think they're happy generally with the kind of revenue that they're getting. And I would also point out that we have in here an RFP for some administrative support and hearing support that's modeled quite closely to the system they have. Why reinvent the wheel?
And if I-
That the cost was going to be with existing personnel. Now you're talking about an RFP, which would be additional costs. And I understand the testimony from your general manager is that you're going to use existing personnel.
We are, for hearings, we do have here an RFP for support.
What means support? What's support?
We will get handheld citation writers.
Such as the DOT.
Why would there be an RFP to draft code?
I think that's correct, yes. That will, when a citation is written on the spot, it'll enter the data, send it to a central database. Automated letters will go out and a number of other things that just help us.
The mechanism to do the job.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else on that? Okay, and then there was a process that we attempted here in Los Angeles when we had photo red light to do an administrative process where a person who received a photo red light citation would go through administrative process. We'd reduce the fine and they'd have an administrative process. Sacramento killed that. And they didn't think that was fair because the majority of the revenue from the vehicle code violation goes to Sacramento and a small portion comes to us. If we determine that the state cannot interfere if we pursue this avenue on the administrative, which is currently going through court, we need to make sure that it's, I mean, the one that we tried, they scrapped it. They said, no, you can't do it. Want to make sure that it's permissible, since the one we tried for photo red light was shot down by Sacramento. Now, if they get a piece of that action on a citation under the current process, I want to make sure that Sacramento won't be able to shoot this process, administrative process, down. Because anytime there's a citation issued for a vehicle code or a penal code, the state receives a bulk of that money. Now, LAMC, we receive the funds. I just want to make sure that we got ourselves covered.
Okay.
We don't go down a path and then Sacramento says you can't do it, and then we buy equipment in it.
Right.
Let's make sure that we cover that. What that? Well, yeah, court, I mean, they all get money off of us. We do the work. No, Sacramento, Jenny Orpez is the one that blocked it. Because I remember discussing it, God bless her soul. But that was something I was very involved with. No, she's the one that,
No, I know, but we stopped because the court system wouldn't cite unless there was a witness.
well,
That's LA Superior Court.
no, that was different. We were trying to change it from a vehicle code violation to an administrative.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Now I
We reduced the fine, we received the money, they'd have administrative hearing, but since Sacramento receives a lot of that money from traffic violations, they're the ones that shot it down. Out of a $500 ticket, we get $170-some.
I think this will be different because it has nothing to do with the penal code, nothing to do with the motor vehicle code.
Is it an LAMC section we're going to be enforcing?
Yes.
Okay.
But as I mentioned earlier, we have the state law we need. The system is decades old. Administrative citations over a century old, really. We have nationwide. We have lots of law in place, lots of court cases that have been decided.
But we're going to be using an LAMC section on
Yes.
this enforcement. Okay.
Yes.
And then the consequences for not paying, what are the consequences for an individual that does not pay?
The administrative citation fine amount increases.
Okay, so now it's increased. What is the process to collect that money?
We would utilize the city's collection process.
Okay,
The controller has to go get it.
controller has to go get it.
And the other thing, by the way, is
I mean,
we're not limited to the administrative citation process. So at some point, we go after them in court.
And there is an opportunity.
It's just a different tool. There are some cases where we'll go right to court anyway. It just depends on the
The
circumstance.
courts have seemed to be very lenient. You want to do Caltrans time, don't pay the fine. I mean, there are processes, if people owe money, there's liens that many agencies attach if you don't want to pay the fine. So
Liens, judgments, property rules, we can leverage the existing resources right now with the Office of Finance for the collection agencies. But collection agencies do delinquency. Once the account becomes delinquent, that's when the collection agency comes into play. The administrative citation program is pre-delinquency. But there is an opportunity to leverage that existing resource. But yes, there are liens, judgments, property tax
I'm
rolls.
just saying, we have a tendency to impose sections, and then when it comes to collecting, we seem to be pretty weak-kneed on it, and we don't really collect all the revenue that we're supposed to be collecting across the board, and that's one of the problems. So I just want to make sure that there's mechanisms in place. A $100 fine for a lot of people is a fortune. For some people, it's not. But a $500 fine or $600, the problem is, if we don't have any teeth for the enforcement, no consequences, it goes nowhere.
Yeah, but we're not collecting anything right now.
Well, that's the problem.
So anything we collect is going to be added on. I mean,
So
you know,
we have a-
And we're tying up our overburdened courts, which will be happy to not have these kinds of items
happy to get
before
rid
it.
Courts will be happy to get rid of it.
At the high end, it's already established within the state to work through the state Board of Equalization, to add this to your tax amounts due, and to work on property tax liens. So if somebody is really going to be recalcitrant, and they're really going to be involved in backyard breeding or animal cruelty or whatever it is, we can use this as a tool to help that enforcement.
but generally speaking, we don't have problems collecting the small fines. It's the large,
Larger fines.
and it's a handful of organizations that are not paying the bulk of the fines. These little fines get paid. But, you know, I just want to say for the record that we should just start the program. Wherever we're going to do it, let's just start it. We have a demonstration project, fix it as we go. And if it costs us a little money, you're forgetting the main purpose of this, to create compliance. So it's not just an issue of money. If it costs us, you know, $10 to get somebody to comply, maybe we're saving an animal's life. Maybe we're saving some neighbors from some obnoxious, you know, barking dog situation. And there's a value to that, particularly when we're the ones that get the phone calls. I don't see them calling the CAO to complain about a barking dog. They call our offices. And so I think there's a value to starting the program, just getting off the dime and stop all the falderall and just get with it and then fix it as you go. The one concern I do have is you didn't mention the equipment purchase, and there's a lot of different ways to do this, and if we're setting up a citywide program and the equipment isn't what we're going to design for the other programs, you know, it's a problem. So I think we have to be a little more clear in what exactly we're talking about, but I think we should just start this program, because I'm just trying to imagine all the citations that could have been issued in the last 5 years, if we assume that's when we really had this thing substantially recommended. All the complaints that our offices would not have received, all the satisfied constituents who could sleep better at night because their dogs aren't barking or some other egregious offense. You know, let's get busy. Let's just do something instead of just doing nothing, because it, you know, what is it Eric Garcetti always says? Let's not let the perfect get in the way of the good. City's never been perfect, so I don't know what we're waiting for, because we're not going to get there. I think we should start with animal regs as much as anybody else, and let's, you know, if we had a proposal for the police department, I'd vote yes on that too. Honestly, I mean, let's just get.
Well, we do have a proposal for both.
Let's do it.
The problem is, it has been held up in the city attorney's office and in budget and finance, but I think moving this forward with these recommendations will actually drive the whole thing.
Yeah.
I think we're only a month or two away from getting it done. If we do it just as animal services, we're going to start up with something that doesn't really resemble the ultimate product, and it may actually be more trouble to undo it and attach it differently to the other program. So
I disagree, for the record. I think we should just start, get it going.
Can we start with the books, I mean, the devices, an RFP?
Yes.
If we could start with the books that we already have in process, and we could put it down administrative and location, and while we do the RFP, because those things are probably over $1,000 a piece, those handheld devices.
Council members, I'd like to remind you that the issue before you is the proposal on the agenda from Animal Services. These other programs, the police department proposal and a change in proposal, those are not on the agenda. The agenda matter is this Animal Services proposal.
My question is directed towards this proposal to, if we want to start now, instead of waiting for the RFP for the handheld devices, if we could start with the existing resources and the paper citations
Yes.
and start with that.
Councilmember Zine, just for the record, what's before you is the instruction to the city attorney to draft the ordinance. Without the ordinance, you cannot have a program. So that is the recommendation that is contained in the report.
So
The RFP is a subsequent matter that comes after the ordinance has been drafted.
So is the city attorney going to draw it and then come back to this committee, and then we'll process, well, then I support it, go forward with that ordinance. And hopefully get it done within 5 years.
Well, I'm going to attempt to make a recommendation, and I would hope I'd get support for this, because I think otherwise we wind up doing this in the most inefficient way possible.
Yeah.
I'd ask that we refer this item to the Budget and Finance Committee to be considered with the citywide ACE program, and that the Animal Services Department become one of the departments in the pilot program. And that we direct the city attorney to prepare a draft ordinance to change the city codes so that they can become part of the citywide ACE program.
We don't need it back here.
It doesn't have to come back to us. We could have it if we want, but
I think we should move forward as quickly.
I think it will move the whole thing forward more quickly than just the animal services would by itself, and we actually can start on the right foot.
Fine with me.
The right call.
The right point, yes.
How will the city attorney think it's going to take to write this up, this ordinance? Since that's what the focus seems to be now.
And I have to tell you, before you answer, that in a meeting that my staff was in, we were told it would take about a month, and that was a week ago. So in theory, I'm hoping we'll hear that it should take about 3 weeks.
Is the city attorney from Animal Regs going to do it, or the city attorney from Budget and Finance?
Councilmember Alarcon, you put your finger right on the right on the point. This, especially if this is a larger endeavor, there's a different group of attorneys in my office who are working on that. I can let them know, as will my colleague, as to your motion to put the animal services portion back into the citywide ACE, but that's really not in my control. So whoever is writing that citywide, that group will in fact be moving this forward.
And I'm hoping that assurance we've gotten that this would be done in 3 weeks to a month will actually prove to be the case. So if we could have a vote on that item,
I support that.
Mr. Alarcon?
Okay, so that
So
passes.
just for the record and to
Agreed.
clarify and to go back to Mr. Zines' question, the process now is that it's going to go to Budget and Finance Committee. By the time they consider the matter, I'm assuming that the city attorney will have drafted the ordinance, then the matter will move forward to City Council,
Yes.
just so that
It doesn't-
we're all clear.
Doesn't have to come
It doesn't
back to
have to
us.
come back here.
And I'm on Budget Committee, so I can watch out for
Good job.
anything that might go wrong, which I don't anticipate. So that item is approved. Item number 3.
And item 3 is the Department of Animal Services again, and they have submitted a report recommending minor amendments to the municipal code, and this will be to be consistent with pet shop permits under their jurisdiction, as well as the issuance of building permits by the Department of Building and Safety. And the department is here to answer any questions.
I wonder if you could walk us through what this does.
Good afternoon again. This is John Chavez from the Department of Animal Services. In October of last year, the City Council adopted an ordinance that prohibits the sale of commercially bred animals, or commonly referred to as puppy mills. And it requires pet shops to get their animals from shelters or from rescue groups. That ordinance goes into effect in June of this year. But it was brought to our attention by pet shop owners who were seeking building permits to operate this new type of model. They were informed by Building and Safety that if they had more than 3 animals older than 4 months overnight in their pet shop, that they would require a kennel permit. Problem with the kennel permit is in having a kennel permit in a retail area, it costs time, costs money, and there's no guarantee that you're going to get a conditional use permit to operate under those circumstances. So the current definition that we have in the municipal code is hampering our efforts to implement that particular ordinance. And for well-meaning pet shops to be a part of this ordinance where they will be using our shelter animals to sell them to the public. So we'd like to make some minor modifications to the definition of pet store, to the definition of kennel. If you turn to page 3 of our report, rather than reading the whole definition of kennel and pet shop, page 3 of 4 in the Department of Animal Services report, you'll see what our recommended language is to both kennel and pet shop. It's underlined. And in our view, if these changes are made, it will still allow, or it's in keeping with the intent of the City Council to have pet stores in retail places, in retail areas. It would continue to confine kennels in industrial areas, but significantly would encourage pet shop owners to be a part of this new ordinance and help us in selling shelter animals. So we are recommending that you approve these amendments in the LA Municipal Code.
Okay. Any questions?
Have you read this letter?
I have not, Councilman.
Animal issues movement.
I don't have that.
Can we pass this in? I'd like to get,
They're opposing this.
well, yeah, but I'd like to know what your response to this letter is. Thank you.
And I wonder if
It's a two-pager.
while I give you a chance to read it, we can hear from the public. We have a few
And also,
speakers.
I'm sorry, just for clarification and for the record, what's before you is, in essence, for you to request that the city attorney incorporate those changes. So at this time, you do not have to act on anything other than to request that the city attorney come back to you with a draft ordinance incorporating the changes that the department is recommending.
Phyllis Dougherty,
yeah.
to be followed by Amy Gilbreath.
I'm speaking on behalf of Animal Issues Movement, and this is not, thank you, this is not a minor change. The reason that you have kennel codes and laws are because you're talking about adult animals with an increased number of waste, among anything. This is not for pet shops that are in existence. This is for nonprofits to create pet shops. And they want to have a large number of adult shelter animals. It all sounds very nice, except maybe it'll be next door to your office. Where there's not the reason you have kennels off in industrial areas and why you have animal shelters excluded from your regular population is because of the disease, the waste, and the noise. And also because shelter animals are not always well behaved, there's a risk there. But the waste issue alone, to have bacteria-laden piles of dog poop, I'm sorry, are you going to wash them out the door across the sidewalk or out the back door? They have to have special sewage systems so that they drain out and don't come back up in the drains of your neighbors. I'm going to be very blunt about this because this is what it amounts to. Disease factors, you don't have an air exchange system in these regular store units, so your animals get sick. They develop diseases. Many diseases are either zoonotic or they are communicable to other pets. You have dog hair, just minor dog hair going everywhere, animals being walked out in front of your office down on Robertson Boulevard, pit bulls that have maybe not been out of a kennel in a very long time. So you have a lot of factors. The reason this is an attempt to circumvent the law. Every other business in this city, when they want a different use of the property, has to go through the conditional use permit. You're now trying to create a special category of nonprofits that are going to be running pet shops. They're still going to be making money on them. They will make it through donations if they don't make it. And if you ask any rescuer why they charge $250 to $300 for their animals, they'll tell you because they're sick when we get them out of the shelter and we have to give them medical care. These animals will be sick also when they come out. There are very many reasons that this is illegal, and it's a circumvention.
Let me ask you one question.
Yes.
Do you think all of those circumstances are not present with pet stores? They don't have to
No, they
deal
aren't.
with feces, they don't have to deal with
No,
anything?
pet shops only have animals under 4 months. They're in elevated locations where they clean them off, clean it out. It's not a factor. They're puppies and kittens. We're talking about large adult animals in large numbers. So there, and the other thing is with a kennel, if you have over 20 animals, you have to have somebody there at night.
I just asked you a
Yeah,
question.
you have to have somebody there that stays.
You're going
yeah.
beyond my question, but thank you.
But nobody's can sleep over in these locations.
Okay, thank you.
Could I respond to that, Councilman?
Why don't I have everybody in public comment, and then you can respond to all of it. Amy Gilbreath, to be followed by Brianne Levitt.
Hello, gentlemen. Thank you. So I'm Amy Gilbreath. I'm the Executive Director of the Found Animals Foundation. We are one of the aforementioned and much disparaged nonprofits who would like to run a humane model pet store in the city of Los Angeles. Some of my other folks that I work with are going to talk to you about the practical issues that they've been facing and us trying to get a facility open. What I wanted to talk to you about is the fact that I applaud the effort of getting the law that's in place into place, but I think that it will not live up to its intention unless this issue gets addressed. We want to adopt out lots of pets from the shelters. In order to make that work and to compete, right, we want to be in commercial locations with a lot of traffic and a lot of visibility. The reason that pet stores are so successful in malls is because the kids wander in while mom is shopping and they must take the dog home. It happens with adult dogs too if they get the visibility. It's very much harder to drive that in an industrial location. Trust me, we've looked at industrial locations. Industrial locations in LA don't have the parking that would be required for a commercial use, so we have to go through a CUP for that as well. And I simply don't think that it was your intent to put a higher burden on humane model pet stores to open than what was previously required of pet stores selling puppy mills. As for the concerns of the previous speaker, these are not issues that we create. I trust me when I tell you we will pick up after our dogs and cats, and that people in residences who can have up to 3 dogs may or may not walk around and have their ill-behaved and ill-trained dog and not pick up their poop. Their dog may or may not be sick. Their dog may or may not bark. And you have existing ordinances in place that deal with all of those. If we were not a good neighbor in one of these locations, we would not be around for very long because you have other mechanisms to deal with that. So my question is just, what was your intent with the original ordinance? And I believe your intent was to allow groups like us to open locations where we could adopt out a lot of pets from your shelters, lower your euthanasia rate, and I don't think that you intended to put a higher burden upon us than you previously did upon pet stores.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
This would allow pet stores, all pet stores, to have older dogs as well.
Yes. But previously, if you wanted to sell...
So you're lowering the standard for all pet stores?
All pet stores will now be required to use animals from shelter or rescue. And the way this came up is that we started trying to pull permits and to do this before this ordinance passed.
But you don't agree with the additional safety requirements?
Which additional safety requirements?
The drainage, the
all of those are
conditional use
issues that
permit?
we'll already have to deal with. Doggy daycare, already in commercial locations. Groomers, already in commercial locations. So issues like waste disposal, hair, etc., safety are already
Do
covered.
they have conditional use permits?
They do not, because they're approved uses in commercial zoning.
Okay, I'm not quite understanding. This sounds a lot more complex than it is, but there must be a reason why there was a cap on the age of the animals.
I think it's an ordinance that hasn't been updated for 20 or 30 years, and
But
I
there's
think
a reason for it nonetheless. What was the reason?
I think at the time it just wasn't anticipated that people would want to adopt or that there would be a focus on adopting older animals. It was back when...
I can't agree. That's not how laws come about. I mean, the fact is that somebody was probably complaining about a store that was selling older animals and causing a lot of
Could be.
disruption in the community.
Before my time, I'm not aware of any complaints or any stores that operated in this model prior to this.
Well, that's my concern. I want to know the history of it, and I want to know why we incorporated that into the original ordinance.
Can't answer that question for you,
And
I'm sorry.
if in fact it was because of the community complaints, that's something we need to be mindful of.
And my understanding of this is that it was mostly a focus on animal boarding, as we usually view kennels, and not so much with an anticipation that we would be selling
But the
older
restriction
animals
is on
in
pet
shops.
stores, not kennels. The restriction is on pet stores with regard to the age. And they want to take away that
Because
cap.
pet stores would be considered kennels if we...
Well, I understand-
Once we
I
did what we
understand
did,
the
we
problem.
found that we were under a different code section relating to kennels unintentionally.
No, I understand that, and I think we need to solve it. But I don't think we solve it by allowing every pet store to have older animals, which might create havoc in particular communities. I don't know where, but some places might have a real problem if the local pet store was approved for kittens and puppies, and all of a sudden they're bringing in older animals. It might be right next to a residence or something.
I think it's important, Councilman, I think it's important to note that we're not just talking about older animals. We would be supplying the pet stores with puppies as well. It's just not,
That's not even my question. I'm talking that you're taking the age limit off of all pet stores. And I'm saying that when that pet store established itself, it was under the rules that capped the age. So the community didn't have a complaint about it. But when you take that limit off, there's going to be a lot of pet stores that may bring in older animals, and the community may start complaining about smell, about all kinds of things. So this is a planning issue. This is a planning issue and a zoning issue. It's not just an animal regulations issue.
We also looked at various cities, Glendale, Culver City, Hermosa Beach, and the county, and they do allow, they have amendments on their books that are consistent with what it is that we're asking. So other cities are, particularly Glendale and Culver City, they have provisions that are very much like what we're proposing.
Do you know why we established the
No, I
cap
do not,
on the age?
Councilman.
Okay, well, until we get an answer to that question, I don't. First of all, I think this should be sent to the planning committee. It's a zoning issue. And secondly, I want an answer to that question before I'm ready to vote.
That is one of the things that our board asked us to do, is to make sure that this went to Plum. So that is one of
Quite honestly, I think what you should be looking at is a conditional use permit process specific to your type of organization, and I support that. But to do it this way, it's opening a can of worms that we don't need.
May I respond?
Yes.
So I understand that. What I would hope that you would understand is, as a nonprofit, the fact of the matter is, in order to pursue a conditional use permit process, I would have to select a location, sign a lease, start paying rent, apply for the CUP, wait the 6 to 12 months before I can open my business. Meanwhile, I'm incurring costs. And if it were a business that were going to make money hand over fist once it opened, that might make sense. But our model's not like that. We don't charge $300 for dogs. So it makes it very financially unappealing, especially if I can go to Culver City where I don't have to go through that process.
I appreciate that, and I'm happy to help you find an expedited process of some kind, but the community is what is being protected by the conditional use process. And so it's not just one singular business owner, we've got to protect the community. That's why we have the zoning laws, and that's why we have conditional use permits. I applaud you for what you're trying to do, but we can't forego all the protections in our zoning laws just to provide a particular protection for animals in this particular case. There's got to be a better way to do this. I'm not saying don't do it, don't pursue it. I'm saying there's got to be a better way to do it, and I think planning should be able to help us. Now, I'm hopeful also that the economic development program that we talked about this morning, by establishing an economic development department that puts the planning, transportation, and all the other functions in one unit to be more coordinated, expedited, and all that, theoretically, that should help all businesses get their processes done quicker. So you should be looking at that as well. But I cannot get my arms around protecting one class against all the other classes that are out there.
Now, personally, I think we may have to agree to disagree on this when we go on the item. The fact is, the community had a chance to weigh in on this because this was a technicality that nobody realized we were facing. So we actually had this item that said, go ahead and have adult animals at your pet shops. And we passed that, I believe, close to unanimously. I don't recall, but you probably were one of the votes in favor of it. And then we found this technicality that the zoning didn't fit, but we all thought we were already passing this, and we got no significant community opposition saying, oh my God, they're going to be adult animals in pet stores, this is really going to be an abuse of our neighborhoods. It's not because anyone thought they couldn't. We did an ordinance that said they could.
Well, you're right. We are agreeing to disagree, but if that was the way the ordinance had come forward, I probably would have voted against it, for the exact same reasons I'm speaking against it now. The pet stores that I have in my community, some of them should be shut down just the way they're operating now. And if you allow them to bring in older animals, believe me, there would be, my wife was raised above a pet store. Now, if they brought in older animals in that particular place, which still exists with apartments over it, I would have a problem in Sun Valley on Glen Oaks Boulevard, and I'll take you to that place if you don't think those conditions exist. They do exist, they do impact on residential, and we got to be careful. Otherwise, it's going to get worse. I'm not suggesting that we don't pursue this. I'm saying there's a way to do it. And I don't think we should let every pet store have older animals.
Councilmember, for the record and to clarify the referral process, what's before you is for you to direct the city attorney to draft an ordinance containing the amendments that are being recommended. Once the city attorney comes back with the draft ordinance, if there's a conditional use permit associated with it, it would also be referred to Plum. At this time, it is not referred to Plum because we follow the council adopted resolution, and what you have before you doesn't affect any conditional use permits at this time because all you're doing is asking the city attorney to come back with the draft ordinance.
To not ask.
Once they come
And I'm
back,
choosing not to
it
ask.
would be referred to Plum if in fact it's something that is related to planning department.
Well, I'm ready to take a vote on this, except we have two speakers. If they're willing not to be heard, that's fine, but I have to give them the opportunity. Brianne Levitt, unless you want to waive your time. Okay. Okay, and John Barrett. Okay, so they're both waiving their time. So I'm going to move that we direct the city attorney's office to report back with a draft ordinance amending the appropriate parts of section 53.00 of the municipal code via a draft ordinance to effectuate the changes in the definitions of pet shop and kennel, and that we direct the planning department to work with the city attorney on that ordinance. Anything else that should be in that?
No, since you added the planning department, but I should just point out that in order for the changes to section 5300 to be effective, there would have to be changes, the same type of changes made to section 12.03 of the LAMC, which is part of the planning code, and that would in fact have to work through the planning department.
So should we include that code in this motion?
Well, it would really, I think that the direction given, as long as the planning, this goes to the planning department so that it's clear that this committee is also sending this item to the planning department, that would be sufficient.
Department or committee?
No, the department.
Planning department.
To actually work on the ordinance.
Right.
If I may interject.
But it should go to the planning committee
In terms
as well.
of process, because you're continuing the matter here in committee, what you're asking the city attorney is to come back with the changes that you're recommending and other changes that he deems appropriate after he has worked with the planning department. When that ordinance comes in, then it will be referred to this committee as well as Plum before it goes forward to council for full city council vote.
I believe the recommendation needs to go to Plum because it's not within the jurisdiction of this committee
At this
to
time, all
consider zoning.
you're asking the
Ask
city
the
attorney
city
to come
attorney,
back
yes.
here. You're continuing the matter.
No,
in committee.
I'm saying it is not in the jurisdiction of this committee to recommend to the city, to instruct the city attorney to make an ordinance relative to a zoning matter.
Well, you're making an ordinance relative to the animal services matter, so it still is within the jurisdiction of this committee.
Correct. However, when we come back with that draft ordinance, it will not get you to where you want to go without the planning department being directed to work on equivalent changes to the planning code.
And at that point, it can go to planning committee if necessary.
Well, it's fine to refer it to Plum as well. I mean, I'm not
There's two
objecting
ways
to
you
that.
can handle this administratively, and I am focusing on the administrative process because I represent the city clerk. In terms of administrative process, again, what's before you doesn't impact the planning department right now. When the matter comes back to committee, then it can be referred, the draft ordinance can be referred to Plum. However, if you choose to move this matter forward to council and direct the city attorney to come back with the draft ordinance and also add the additional language that the city attorney has provided you with, you can do that as well. It will go before full city council, then they're officially asked to come back with the draft ordinance. They can work with the planning department and then come back with the ordinance itself. So there's two ways of doing it. Continue the matter here, have the city attorney come back with the draft ordinance, or move the matter forward to full city council, instructing the city attorney to come back with the ordinance.
I think we want the matter to come back here. And if it winds up being referred to Plum on the way, if that's deemed appropriate, that's fine too. So,
Is everybody in agreement?
So that's the motion. I believe we have 2 in favor, Mr. Alarcon
One
in
no.
opposition.
Okay.
And I believe that is it for this agenda. So we are adjourned.